I think ideally they get, they learn a lot. They learn a lot technically. They learn professional skills. They learn how to manage projects. They learn how to design experiments, things like that. They learn communication skills. I think all that will come regardless of kind of what the thesis is, if they're really committed to it. I hope they get things that are more tangible, like co-authorship on a publication or authorship of a paper in a journal or a conference abstract. And that's not uncommon in my group for thesis students to get those kinds of things they can put on their resume. I hope they would they do well and they get a really strong recommendation letter from me for whatever the next step is, whether graduate school or work. I think that's an important benefit of doing a thesis, is that for some students this will be the one time they spend working really intensely on a project that's kind of like the real world, that'll be like what you do in graduate school or what you might do in the industry. And so a recommendation letter from someone who's supervised that project has a lot of value for someone who's looking to hire you. So I think that's important. And then also going on to interview for graduate school or industry, being able to talk about your thesis project will also become very important. So having, from thesis, you should then have a project that you've been really invested in, that you know really well, and you can talk about at a pretty high level when it comes to potential employers. I think there's a lot of tangible things that you get the thesis at the end, you get the document, but there's a lot of other things that come with that maybe some students don't recognize the value, the added value that the thesis can bring.
I think it is a short, sort of small dose taste of what it's like to do research at a graduate level or perhaps even in industry. Although it's much, being an academic environment, it's more, and with a thesis document at the end, it's obviously modeled after a sort of master's or PhD process. So I think that's the real outcome that they can get, learning outcome. Other outcomes are things, as I said, like getting more strongly connected with one particular faculty member. That can also prove mentoring can prove really valuable.
I think the main thing is that this is the first real, full year project where they're kind of in control. They're trying to identify an existing problem. They're trying to develop, whether it's a hardware system or a software system, to address that problem, and they're actually making contribution to this research field. So I think, in the end, really what they're getting out of is this kind of individual work where there's not necessarily like a set assignment questions. They really develop the questions, and then they develop the answer to the questions as they move along. And I think that's really important in terms of independent study. And it gives them, of course, a really interesting perspective of how we conduct research here.
So I think the main thing they should obtain from the thesis experience is the ability to work self-directed. As I say, this is their first encounter in their undergraduate career with something that is not well defined. So their ability to define what needs to be done and execute on that's a really key ability to have when you enter the workplace, or certainly if you continue down the road and do graduate studies. So that's an important skill to acquire. I find sometimes students have a much grandiose view of what they're going to be doing, and they think it's like a PhD thesis or something like that. And when it is a bit more well defined than they might otherwise like, there's some disappointment maybe with that. But that's the nature of the beast. They're taking 5 courses in engineering science on top of the thesis, so things necessarily have to be scaled back. We notice our graduate students who are only taking 2 courses, quite often, they have the same problem, actually, but our engineering science students do very well considering they're taking the 5 courses.
Thanks for watching. You might be interested in another video in this series, or you might want to watch the uncut, full-length interviews with our instructors. To do this, select pause to stop the video, and then select on a button or an image.